Oh Han-ai, a high school student, has been secretly in love with Baek Sung-jo, the smartest and most attractive student in the school for several years. Despite her clumsiness and poor academic performance, she never gives up hope and dreams that one day she can win his heart. Han-ai lives with her father, a small restaurant owner, and enjoys spending time with her best friends, Ju-rai and Min-ah. Her life flows quietly without much change, until one day she decides to make a bold move. During one of her school days, Han-ai decides to confess her feelings to Sung-jo. Her friends support her, even though they realize the chances are slim. Hae-ni writes a letter confessing her love and waits anxiously for the right moment to give it to Sung-jo. She meets him in the hallway and, overcome with fear, holds out the letter to him. Sung-jo, showing no emotion, takes the letter and promises to read it later. The next day, Han-ni waits impatiently for a reply, full of hope and anxiety. Instead of a romantic confession, however, she receives a shocking reply. Sung-jo returns the letter to her, corrected in red pen, with underlined grammatical errors and a cold remark that he's not interested in girls who can't even spell correctly. Hae-ni is heartbroken and feels humiliated, but her friends try to support her, reassuring her that Sung-jo just isn't worth her tears. That same day, Hae-ni faces another disaster. Returning home, she finds her house completely destroyed because it was built with irregularities. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but it means that now she and her father have nowhere to live. At this difficult moment, an old friend of her father's, Mr. Baek, comes to the rescue and offers to help them move into his house temporarily. Han-ai is grateful for the help and, despite the awkwardness of the situation, agrees. When Han-ni and her father arrive at Mr. Baek's house, she is surprised to learn that the house belongs to none other than Baek Sung-jo and his family. She is stunned and embarrassed to realize that she will now have to live under the same roof with someone who has so cruelly rejected her feelings. There's no way out, however, and Hae-ni is forced to accept this as a fact. Seung-jo isn't thrilled with the news either. He's used to a quiet life where everything is under control, and Han-ai's presence seems annoying to him. He continues to act cold and aloof, ignoring her attempts to connect. Han-ai, though depressed by his behavior, tries to remain optimistic. She hopes that by living with him, she will be able to show him her true self and perhaps change his opinion of her. Soon, new difficulties begin to arise. Han-ni has to get used to living in a new house where she feels alien and superfluous. Her clumsiness leads to many funny and awkward situations, which irritates Sung-jo and his younger brother, Baek Yoon-jo. The younger brother, who has the same sharp mind as Sung-jo, doesn't miss an opportunity to tease Han-ni and laugh at her awkward moments. Meanwhile, Sung-jo's mother, Mrs. Baek, immediately begins to sympathize with Han-ai. Her cheerfulness and kindness win her over, and she decides to support her in her efforts to win Sung-jo's heart. Mrs. Baek tries to create an environment where Han-ni can spend more time with her son, which of course irritates Sung-jo, but he doesn't dare to contradict his mother. Hae-ni's life changes drastically after moving into Sung-jo's house. Her awkwardness and feelings of unease are heightened by the constant presence of Sung-jo, who seems completely unfazed and aloof. Despite her attempts to be attentive and polite, she constantly finds herself in the middle of comical situations that only seem to annoy Sung-jo even more. Ha-ni's first morning in her new home begins with an awkwardness. She accidentally bumps into Sung-jo in the kitchen, spilling water on him. Her embarrassment and apology don't impress him. Sung-jo stares at her coldly and doesn't even pay attention to her attempts to clean up the water, continuing his business as if it doesn't exist at all. Han-ni feels even more awkward, but tries not to show her true feelings. At school, Han-ni's life becomes more complicated as well. Her classmates quickly learn that she's now living with Sung-jo, and it becomes a major topic of discussion and gossip. Some students begin to tease Han-ni, insinuating that she is purposely trying to get close to Sung-jo by using pity and her unfortunate situation. These words hurt Han-ni deeply, but she tries to hold on without showing how hurt she is. Sung-jo isn't left out of these rumors either. His popularity makes him the subject of constant scrutiny, and now his every move with Hae-ni is being examined under a microscope. He pulls away from her even more, showing in front of everyone that he has no feelings for her. Hae-ni notices this and feels increasingly depressed, but her stubborn nature won't let her give up. Soon, however, an important conversation takes place between Han-ni and her friends Ju-ri and Min-ah that becomes the beginning of change. The friends, seeing how hard Han-ni is going through, decide to support her in their own way. They make a bet between them and Sung-jo, the point of which is for Sung-jo to start tutoring Han-ni and help her improve her grades. In return, they promise to stop spreading rumors about his relationship with Han-ni. Sung-jo, at first hesitant to make such an agreement, agrees in order to stop being bothered by Han-ni's girlfriends. He sees it as a small favor and doesn't give it much thought, though he warns Ha-nae that his teaching methods will be harsh. Ha-nae, though a little startled by his words, is still happy that this will give her the opportunity to spend more time with him. Meanwhile, Sung-jo's mother, Mrs. Baek, continues to support Ha-nae by showing genuine concern for her. She decides that Ha-nae should feel at home and begins to involve her in family activities, such as cooking dinner and participating in family discussions. Mrs. Baek hopes that in time, her son will see a different side of Ha-nae, and even begins to tease him, implying that Ha-nae might be the perfect match for him. However, the tension in the house grows when Sung-jo's younger brother, Baek Yoon-jo, begins to actively mock Ha-nae for her clumsiness. He comes up with all sorts of pranks to embarrass her, and seems to find it incredibly amusing. Ha-nae tries not to take offense, realizing that he's just a kid, but his barbs still hurt her sometimes. At school, Ha-nae and Sung-jo gradually start spending more time together because of their studies. Sung-jo proves to be a strict and demanding teacher who doesn't tolerate mistakes and forces Ha-nae to study for real. He makes her review the material over and over again until she understands it. Ha-nae tries her best not to let him down, even though studying is difficult for her. In the process, she begins to notice that behind his cold exterior is a man who really cares about others, even though he doesn't show it. Over time, small, barely noticeable moments between them begin to occur when Sung-jo shows concern for Ha-nae. For example, one day he stays after school to help her study for a test without telling anyone. He also occasionally gives her advice not only on her studies but on life in general, which alleviates her fear of him a bit. These moments go unnoticed by the others, but for Ha-nae, they become important signs that Sung-jo still has the kindness she once saw in him. Ha-nae continues her studies under Sung-jo, who remains a strict and demanding teacher. Despite her efforts, he ruthlessly points out all her mistakes, which sometimes offends her, but also motivates her to work harder. At school, rumors that they are living together persist, and Ha-nae continues to be the object of ridicule and teasing. But she tries to ignore it, because it's important to her not to disappoint Sung-jo. Soon the school is preparing for the annual festival, and all the students are immersed in the preparations. Ha-nae's class decides to put on a theater performance, and despite her modest acting ability, her friends insist that she play one of the lead roles. With no other choice, Ha-nae agrees, though she's overwhelmed with excitement and fear that she'll embarrass herself in front of Sung-jo again. During rehearsals, Ha-nae encounters difficulties and her performance leaves much to be desired. She begins to doubt her abilities and even considers giving up, but her friends urge her not to give up. Sung-jo intervenes and helps her with rehearsals, although he does so with a look of indifference. This gesture unexpectedly touches Ha-nae, and she gets a new dose of inspiration from him. At the festival itself, Ha-nae is still nervous, but her friends' support and the little help from Sung-jo give her confidence. The performance isn't without its difficulties, but Ha-nae manages to deal with her excitement and finish her role with dignity. After the performance, she feels very relieved and even a little triumphant that she was able to overcome her fears. Sung-jo, who had been watching her performance with an indifferent look, still can't hide a slight smile when he sees her joy. He approaches her after her performance and briefly praises her efforts, which is a real reward for Ha-nae. She senses that some understanding is beginning to emerge between them, and it strengthens her hope that Sung-jo will one day see her not only as a student, but as someone worthy of his love. Meanwhile, Baek Yoon-jo continues his pranks, trying to make Ha-nae feel uncomfortable in her new home. However, despite his efforts, Ha-nae begins to find common ground with him, and a kind of friendship even begins to form between them. Mrs. Baek, watching the events unfold, stays on Ha-nae's side and supports her in every way possible. She even begins to openly express her hope that Sung-jo and Ha-nae will someday become a real couple, which makes Sung-jo feel awkward, though he hesitates to argue with his mother. Later, after the festival is over, an unexpected conversation takes place between Ha-nae and Sung-jo. Sung-jo, though still cold, starts asking her questions about her future plans and what she really wants to accomplish in life. Ha-nae, despite all her uncertainty, honestly answers that her main goal is to become someone who can make him happy. This confession makes Sung-jo hesitate, but he doesn't show it and just nods as if he's taken note of her words. School exams are coming up, and Ha-nae faces another challenge. Her efforts and Seung-jo's support begin to pay off, and her results are much better than she expected. This success emboldens her, and she begins to believe that with enough effort, she can accomplish a lot. Despite all the success, Sung-jo remains a mystery to Ha-nae. He's still cold and aloof, but subtle signs of attention begin to flicker in his demeanor. Ha-nae begins to notice that her presence isn't so indifferent to him, and this gives her new hope. After a successful performance at the school festival and improved grades, Ha-nae begins to feel a little more confident, especially thanks to the support of Sung Jo, who, though he remains cold, shows increasing signs of caring. Their world is not without turmoil, however. The Baek and Oh families continue to grow closer. Mrs. Baek becomes increasingly supportive of Hae-nai, seeing in her the potential for the perfect daughter-in-law. She begins to involve her in family activities and even teaches her how to cook Seung-jo's favorite dishes. Ha-nai enjoys this closeness with Seung-jo's mother, though she feels awkward knowing that her feelings for him remain unrequited. The situation at school remains complicated. There is a new student, Yoon Hae-ra, who immediately attracts the attention of others with her beauty and intelligence. She sets her sights firmly on Sung-jo, believing him to be the perfect match. Ha-nai instantly feels threatened when she sees Hae-ra easily finding common ground with Sung-jo, and he doesn't seem to mind her attentions. Ha-nai is overcome with jealousy, and she begins to doubt herself and her chances of winning Sung-jo's heart. Yoon Hae-ra, realizing Ha-nai's interest in Sung-jo, begins to purposely provoke her. She openly flirts with Sung-jo and doesn't miss an opportunity to belittle Ha-nai by making her look bad. Hae-ni tries to resist, but her insecurity and feelings of inferiority make her vulnerable to Hae-ra's manipulations. Despite her inner torment, Ha-nai remains determined to continue her training and tries to keep her cool in her dealings with Sung-jo. He remains seemingly indifferent as he watches her struggle, but there's something new in his gaze when he sees how hard she's trying despite her struggles. Soon the big moment comes, another school test that's supposed to show how hard Hae-ni has been studying under Sung-jo's guidance. She struggles to focus despite the pressure and excitement of competing with Hae-ra. On the day the results are announced, Ha-nai has mixed feelings. Her scores have improved significantly, but she still feels that it's not enough to impress Sung-jo. Sung-jo, upon seeing her results, doesn't compliment her much, but his tacit acknowledgement of her progress is expressed in one brief but meaningful glance. For Ha-nai, this moment becomes a small victory. She realizes that her efforts haven't gone unnoticed, and it gives her the strength to keep fighting for her happiness. Meanwhile, Hae-ra isn't about to give up. She decides to go to more drastic measures to win Sung-jo's attention, but her plans remain a secret. Ha-ni, sensing the impending threat, prepares herself for new challenges, unaware of what other difficulties lie ahead. Mrs. Baek, who continues to watch Sung-jo and Ha-nai's relationship develop, decides it's time for more action. She starts pushing Sung-jo more and more toward Ha-nai, convinced that her son just hasn't realized his feelings yet. Ha-ni, for her part, grows closer to Baek's family, which gradually becomes a source of strength and support for her. At the same time, a friendship develops between Ha-nai and Baek Yoon-jo, Sung-jo's younger brother. Despite their initial disagreements and his barbs, Yoon-jo begins to show genuine affection for her. He sees her as someone who is trying her best, and although he continues to tease her, he does so without malice. Ha-nai begins to see him as a younger brother, to whom she grows increasingly attached. As Ha-nai becomes more and more absorbed in studying for her exams and competing for Sung-jo's attention, she begins to feel that her efforts are not going unnoticed. However, despite her best efforts, Sung-jo's cold demeanor doesn't change, causing her to doubt her own abilities. Nevertheless, she continues to fight for his acceptance, believing that one day she will be able to reach his heart. Soon, the school announces an upcoming field trip that promises to be an unforgettable experience for all the students. The days ahead are full of adventures and challenges that may bring those who have already become part of each other's lives closer together or further apart. Ha-nai sees this trip as an opportunity to get closer to Sung-jo and show him that she can be more than just an awkward student. The excursion begins with the usual hustle and bustle: packing, worry, noise, and fun. Ha-nai and her friends are enthusiastic, hoping for a fun time away from the school walls. Sung-jo is as aloof as usual, but his calmness and confidence attract the attention of not only Ha-nai, but also the other girls, including Yoon Hae-ra, who is determined to take every opportunity to get close to him. On the first day of the trip, a team game is organized in which all the students participate. The students are divided into teams, and luckily for Ha-nai, she manages to get into the same group as Sung-jo. She is determined to do her best and prove that she can be useful. Her clumsiness causes Sung-jo's team to be on the verge of losing the game. Ha-ni loses her balance, causing her to fall, and she feels like all is lost. She worries that she's disappointed everyone again, especially Sung-jo. However, to her surprise, Sung-jo doesn't show any irritation. Instead of rebuking her, he helps her up and continue participating in the game. This unexpected gesture cheers her up and brings back her confidence. The team pulls together and wins the game thanks to Sung-jo's clear instructions and general support for each other. This becomes a big moment for Ha-ni when she realizes that despite her shortcomings, she can be part of something bigger. However, the evening presents another challenge. While walking around the neighborhood, Ha-ni accidentally falls behind the group and gets lost in the woods. At first she doesn't think much of it, confident that she can quickly find her way back. However, she soon panics when she realizes she's lost and doesn't know which way to go. Night approaches and the forest grows more and more ominous. When the news that Ha-ni is missing reaches the camp, there is a general commotion. Teachers and students gather to search for her, but the forest is large and finding her is not easy. Sung-jo, upon hearing what has happened, at first tries to hide his alarm, but his concern for Ha-ni still becomes apparent. He decides to act on his own, confident that he can find her faster than the others. Meanwhile, Ha-ni, wandering through the forest, begins to lose hope. She is overwhelmed by fear, loneliness, and a sense of helplessness. She begins to realize that her weaknesses and insecurities could lead to serious consequences. At this moment, she realizes how much she depends on the support of Sung-jo and others, who have become an important part of her life. Suddenly, a figure appears out of the darkness. It's Sung-jo, who, despite his cold exterior, is clearly concerned about her condition. He helps her up and, putting his arm around her shoulders, leads her back to the camp. Ha-ni is stunned by his unexpected warmth and concern, which she wasn't expecting. This moment brings them closer together, and though Sung-jo doesn't utter any words of comfort, his actions speak louder than words. Back at the camp, they are greeted by anxious teachers and classmates who have already begun to worry about Ha-ni. Everyone is relieved to see them back, but Hai-ra, seeing Sung-jo helping Ha-ni, becomes jealous. She doesn't understand what could be tying the two of them together, and she begins to suspect that Sung-jo might have more than just sympathy for Ha-ni. At night, Ha-ni, lying in her tent, can't sleep for a long time. Her thoughts return again and again to the day's events and how Sung-jo came to her aid at the most difficult moment. She begins to realize that behind his cold facade is a man who is capable of deep feelings, even though he's not used to showing them. Ha-ni realizes that her feelings for Sung-jo are not in vain. Sung-jo, lying in his tent, also reflects on what has happened. He can't understand why he's been so hurt by Ha-ni's disappearance and why he's relieved that she's okay. These new emotions confuse him, and he realizes that Ha-ni is beginning to take up more space in his life than he is willing to admit. The situation after the tour remains tense, and Ha-ni can't get the accidental kiss that happened between her and Sung-jo out of her mind. Despite her embarrassment, she can't help but hope that it was a sign of change in their relationship. However, Sung-jo continues to act as if nothing happened. To him, it was just an accident that's not worth talking about. Ha-ni, full of anxiety and doubt, waits for some sort of acknowledgement or discussion of the incident, but Sung-jo remains cold and reserved. He avoids any conversation on the subject, which makes Ha-ni feel even more vulnerable. She's not sure how she should interpret his behavior. Does he really feel nothing, or does he just not want to show his emotions? Against this backdrop, a new source of tension appears at school. Bong Joon-gyu, a classmate who has had a long and unrequited crush on Ha-ni. His insistent attention begins to irritate her, even though he genuinely cares for her and tries to support her in difficult situations. Joon-gyu tries to prove his love for Ha-ni in many ways. He cooks dinners for her, accompanies her everywhere, and demonstrates his devotion in every way possible. Sung-jo, seeing Joon-gyu's efforts to attract Ha-ni's attention, has unexpected feelings of jealousy. He can't understand why he's annoyed by Joon-gyu's attention to Ha-ni, since he's shown little interest in her life up to this point. This internal conflict causes Sung-jo to wonder about his true feelings for Ha-ni. Meanwhile, Ha-ni begins to feel supported by the new friends she makes at school. These relationships become an important source of strength for her, especially at times when she feels lonely and rejected. However, her heart still belongs completely to Sung-jo, and she can't get him out of her mind, despite her best efforts. The university exams become a new test for Ha-ni. She prepares diligently under Sung-jo's guidance, and though she finds his methods too harsh, she's grateful for his help. Not only is this an opportunity for her to improve her grades, but it's also a chance to spend more time with Sung-jo. Despite his coldness, Ha-ni continues to believe that her efforts will one day be rewarded. Sung-jo's family, especially his mother, begins to take a more active role in their lives. Mrs. Baek tries her best to bring Sung-jo and Ha-ni closer together, seeing her son begin to show subtle but still visible signs of attention to the girl. She's convinced that Ha-ni could be the perfect match for her son, and does her best to push them closer together. Soon Ha-ni and Sung-jo graduate from high school, and there comes a point when their paths may part. Ha-nae fears that after graduation, they will stop seeing each other and her chances of getting closer to Sung-jo will disappear. However, fate decides otherwise. Both of them enroll in the same university. For Ha-nae, this becomes a new hope for the future, and she decides not to miss this opportunity. As university life begins, their relationship begins to change. Ha-nae tries to adapt to her new surroundings, while Sung-jo continues to remain withdrawn and focused on his studies. Despite this, however, small but meaningful changes begin to occur between them. Sung-jo begins to show concern for Ha-nae, though he doesn't do so explicitly. For example, he protects her from the taunts of her classmates and helps her with her studies when he sees her struggling. The university entrance exams become a major test for Ha-nae and Sung-jo. Ha-nae feels incredibly pressured because she knows that her chances of getting into university depend on her abilities. Sung-jo, as always, remains cold and demanding as he helps her study for her exams. He makes her study hard, not tolerating any excuses or mistakes. Ha-nae finds this period to be a hardship, but she continues to work as hard as she can, hoping that her efforts will bring results. At the same time, Sung-jo faces pressure from his mother, who actively interferes in his personal life. Mrs. Baek makes no secret of her desire to see Ha-nae and Sung-jo together, and she continues to encourage their rapprochement in every way possible. Sung-jo feels uncomfortable under the constant attention of his mother, who persistently tries to play the role of matchmaker. He tries to keep his distance, but the pressure from all sides becomes more and more palpable. Exam preparation reaches its peak when Ha-nae, exhausted and tired, begins to lose faith in her own abilities. She faces Sung-jo's constant ridicule and displeasure, which only reinforces her inner doubts. Despite this, her friends and family continue to support her, reassuring her that she's capable of more than she thinks. Meanwhile, small but important moments of bonding occur between Ha-nae and Sung-jo. During one of their study sessions, Sung-jo, noticing Ha-nae struggling to do her best despite her difficulties, suddenly shows her warm attention. He quietly tells her that she can do it if she doesn't give up. And those words become a source of renewed strength and confidence for Ha-nae. This moment makes her feel that her efforts have not been in vain, and that perhaps Sung-jo is beginning to see something more in her, too. Finally, the day of the exams arrives. It's a critical moment for Ha-nae, and she realizes that not only her future, but also her relationship with Sung-jo, depends on her success. She tries to cope with her excitement and focus on the tasks at hand. The exam is stressful, but Ha-nae feels that she's done her best. After the exams are over, there comes a time of waiting for the results, and the wait becomes unbearable for Ha-nae. She worries that her efforts may not have paid off, and fears that her dream of going to university with Sung-jo will remain out of reach. However, her loved ones continue to support her, giving her confidence that everything will be okay. Finally, the results are announced. To Ha-nae's delight, her efforts have been rewarded. She has passed the exams and will now be able to attend the same university as Sung-jo. This event becomes a major turning point in her life, as she realizes that her persistence and effort can indeed pay off. Meanwhile, Sung-jo doesn't express open joy at her success, but in his eyes Ha-nae notices the recognition of her efforts. This moment becomes important to her. She realizes that despite his coldness, her victory hasn't gone unnoticed. Immediately after they enter university, Ha-nae begins to realize that life at university will be full of new challenges and trials. However, her joy at being able to succeed alongside Sung-jo outweighs her fears. She is ready to face new challenges and continue to fight for her place beside him, hoping that one day his heart will open to her. After entering the same university as Sung-jo, Ha-nae is relieved that they won't have to part, but at the same time realizes that she will have to adapt to a new environment. Life at the university proves to be much more difficult than at school. Her studies become more intense, and she finds it increasingly difficult to cope with the demands of the curriculum. Sung-jo, on the other hand, seems to be able to cope easily with any assignment, which further emphasizes the gap between their academic abilities. Complicating the situation is the fact that Sung-jo remains withdrawn and inaccessible. He shows little interest in what's going on around him and devotes all his time to his studies. Ha-nae begins to feel more and more lonely, even though they are studying at the same university. She realizes that her dream of getting closer to him remains distant for now. Meanwhile, Yoon-hae-ra, who is also enrolled at the same university, doesn't miss an opportunity to show Ha-nae her superiority. She's convinced that her position and academic success will make her the perfect match for Sung-jo. Hae-ra continues to actively seek his attention, organizing library meetings and study groups where she can spend time around him. Ha-nae watches their interactions and can't help but feel jealous, realizing that Hae-ra is much more successful at everything she does in terms of studying and socializing with Sung-jo. Amidst all of this, Hanai doesn't give up and continues her attempts to adapt to life at the university. She meets new friends who support her in difficult moments and help her cope with academic difficulties. However, her insecurities and fear of failure sometimes take over, and she begins to question whether she can even hold her own at university next to strong competitors like Hirai. One day, Hani learns that Sung-jo is entering a prestigious scholarship competition that could open up many opportunities for him in the future. For Hanai, this becomes yet another confirmation of how far she is from him in terms of academic achievement. She feels overwhelmed, realizing that she will never be able to match his level. However, despite her doubts, she decides that she must support Sung-jo in his endeavors, even if she has to forgo her own desires to do so. As Sung-jo and Hanai are preparing for the competition, an unexpected conversation takes place. Sung-jo, seeing that she's becoming more and more immersed in her own worries, asks what's troubling her. Hanai, a little embarrassed, confesses that she's afraid of losing him in this new world where everyone around her seems so much better and smarter than she is. Her confession touches Sung-jo, and he shows genuine concern for her for the first time in a long time. He tells her that her presence in his life is far more important than she realizes, and that her efforts and perseverance always earn his respect. Meanwhile, the day of the pageant is approaching. Hanai tries not to show her worries, but inside she's torn by fear and anxiety. She realizes that if Sung-jo wins the scholarship, it could cause even more distance between them, as he might go abroad to study. Despite this, however, she decides that she'll support him no matter how the situation turns out. On the day of the competition, Hanai comes to support Sung-jo. Even though it's not easy for her, she sees how confidently he handles the tasks and realizes that he really deserves to win. After the contest is over, when the results are still to be announced, Hanai finds the strength to approach him and congratulate him on his success. Sung-jo, noticing her tense face, shows concern for her again, telling her that what matters most to him is her support, no matter how the contest ends. When the results of the competition are announced, Sung-jo wins the scholarship, prompting a storm of applause and congratulations. Hanai, despite her anxiety, is genuinely happy for him, realizing that this is a huge step in his life. However, she also realizes that their paths may now be parted if he decides to take the opportunity. After starting university, Hanai and Sung-jo officially begin dating. Although their relationship takes on a new status, it remains complicated. Sung-jo remains cold and reserved, which sometimes makes Hanai feel insecure. Despite this, she continues to fight for his attention and love, hoping that their relationship will only grow stronger. New challenges at the university don't keep her waiting. Soon Hanai faces the first difficulties in her relationship with Sung-jo. They both begin to realize that their differences could be a serious obstacle to their shared happiness. Hanai constantly feels a step behind, and this begins to cause her internal conflict. She wonders if she'll ever really be able to match Sung-jo, given that he's so successful and smart. Meanwhile, Sung-jo begins to notice how his attitude toward Hanai is affecting her. Though he's reluctant to admit it even to himself, his coldness and aloofness causes her pain and doubt. He begins to think about changing his approach to their relationship, but it's not easy for him. Sung-jo isn't used to showing his emotions and doesn't know how to properly care for Hanai without losing his independence. As Hanai continues to struggle with her feelings and insecurities, new complications loom on the horizon. Tensions are rising at the university due to upcoming exams and study projects that require the students' utmost concentration and effort. Hanai, not being the strongest student, finds it difficult to prepare for the exams. Her desire to be on Sung-jo's level begins to take a toll on her emotional state. She feels increasingly pressured to not let him down and prove that she deserves his love. Meanwhile, new rivals are also appearing on the horizon. Students at the university begin to show interest in Hanai and Sung-jo, causing both of them to feel jealous. A new girl, Jeonju-ri, appears and clearly shows interest in Sung-jo, which throws Hanai off balance. Although Sung-jo doesn't react to her attempts to get closer, Hanai begins to feel jealous and insecure even more. She feels like she's not good enough for Sung-jo, and this leads to more doubts. The situation escalates when Sung-jo begins to face the choice between his career and his relationship with Hanai. His ambitions and desires begin to conflict with what Hanai expects of him. He realizes that his decisions could drastically change their future, and this causes him internal conflict. Sung-jo begins to realize that he will have to make difficult decisions that could affect his relationship with Hanai. One day, when Hanai is particularly vulnerable and depressed because of her learning failures and jealousy, a serious conversation takes place between her and Sung-jo. Hanai, unable to hide her feelings any longer, confesses that she's afraid of losing him because she's not as smart and successful as the other girls around him. She says that she sometimes feels like she's not good enough for him, and it makes her desperate. Sung-jo, though not used to sharing his feelings, realizes that this conversation is important for their relationship. He tries to explain to Ha-nae that her kindness, loyalty, and desire to improve mean much more to him than her academic success. He says that her sincerity and caring is what really attracts him to her. Despite his reticence, Ha-nae begins to realize that his feelings for her are deeper than she thought. This conversation becomes an important milestone in their relationship. Ha-nae begins to feel more confident, realizing that she's important to Sung-jo not because of her success or appearance, but because of her sincerity and caring. This helps her deal with her inner doubts and gain a new sense of self-confidence. At the same time, Seung-jo begins to realize that he needs to change too. He realizes that his coldness and aloofness could ruin what he has with Ha-nae, and begins to think about how to become a more attentive and caring partner. It won't be a quick process, but he realizes it's important for their future. Family hardship suddenly bursts into Ha-nae's life. Her father, who has always been her support and backbone, suddenly falls ill. This event brings the Oh and Baek families even closer together. Mrs. Baek and her husband give Ha-nae and her father all the support they can, helping to arrange treatment and care. Sung-jo, despite his outward coldness, shows concern for Ha-nae during this difficult period by staying by her side and helping with daily chores. For Ha-nae, this period becomes especially difficult. She worries about her father's health and feels vulnerable and lost. However, the support from Sung-jo's family helps her hang in there. Sung-jo, although he does not express his feelings openly, tries to be there for her and cheer her up. He helps her cope with her daily struggles, and Ha-nae begins to realize how important his presence in her life is. Meanwhile, the relationship between Sung-jo and Ha-nae begins to take on a new hue. Sung-jo begins to realize that Ha-nae has become more than just a neighbor or classmate to him. He sees how she selflessly takes care of her father without losing her fortitude, and he respects and admires that. He begins to think about how important she has become to him. Soon Sung-jo decides to take a serious step. Seeing how Ha-nae is worried about the future and fears for her father's health, he unexpectedly proposes marriage to her. This comes as a complete surprise to Ha-nae. She didn't expect this turn of events, and in the first few seconds, she can't even believe it's actually happening. Sung-jo's proposal is filled with sincerity. He explains that he wants to support her not only as a friend but also as a future spouse, to be there for her, and help her through any difficulties they may encounter along the way. This confession becomes the moment for Ha-nae when all her dreams begin to become a reality. After Ha-nae agrees, the families begin preparations for the wedding. Mrs. Baek, who has always been supportive of their relationship, happily takes on the task of organizing the festivities. The preparations take place in an atmosphere of joy and excitement, despite the difficulties they face. After Ha-nae accepts Sung-jo's proposal, preparations for the wedding begin in earnest. For both families, the event becomes more than just a celebration. It's a symbol of uniting two people who are close to each other and who have been through many trials together. Mrs. Baek enthusiastically takes it upon herself to organize all the details of the wedding, carefully choosing everything from the ceremony venue to the color of the decorations. Ha-nae herself is in a state of joyful excitement. She still finds it hard to believe that she's about to become Sung-jo's wife, the man she's loved and longed for so long. Sung-jo, despite his reticence, also has special feelings about the upcoming wedding. He's not used to sharing his emotions, but Ha-nae notices that he's become softer and more attentive to her, even in the smallest things. The wedding preparations are accompanied by many comical and touching moments. Mrs. Baek, trying to make everything perfect, sometimes goes too far in her enthusiasm, which causes funny situations. Nevertheless, her care and love for Ha-nae is evident, and she feels part of this large and friendly family. At the same time, Ha-nae faces new doubts and fears. She worries whether she will be able to fulfill her role as a wife, whether she will be a worthy partner for Sung-jo. These thoughts sometimes worry her, but every time she sees Sung-jo, she finds the strength to overcome her fears. His calmness and confidence give her strength, and she begins to believe that together they can overcome any difficulties. Finally, the wedding day arrives. The ceremony takes place among family and close friends. Ha-nae walks down the aisle with trepidation in her heart, realizing that this day will be the beginning of a new phase in her life. Sung-jo, standing at the altar, waits for her with a slight smile, and the moment seems magical to Ha-nae. When they exchange vows, Ha-nae feels the happiest in the world. Sung-jo, though reserved, makes it clear that this moment is important to him. They both realize that they've come a long way, full of trials and difficulties, but now they're ready to start a new life together. After the ceremony, the newlyweds and guests enjoy the festivities. The atmosphere is filled with joy and fun, and Ha-nae feels for the first time that all her dreams have begun to come true. she dances with Sung-jo, feeling his warmth and care, and realizes that this man really loves her. After the wedding, everyday life comes, and Ha-nai and Sung-jo begin to get used to living together. The first days and weeks are full of joy and newness, but also challenges. They face the usual problems of a young couple: the need to adjust to living together, domestic issues, work and study. But despite this, they are both confident that they can handle whatever comes their way. Sung-jo, though he remains reserved and focused on his career, begins to pay more and more attention to Ha-nai. He realizes that his support and involvement in their life together is important to her. Ha-ni, in turn, tries to be his rock, supporting him in his endeavors and helping him cope with any difficulties. Life after marriage brings new challenges as well as joys. They continue to get to know each other. Their relationship grows deeper and stronger. Despite all their differences, they begin to realize that this is what makes their union unique. Their love, based on overcoming difficulties and mutual understanding, helps them find common ground and support each other in any situation. After a few happy months together, Ha-nai and Sung-jo begin to face new challenges that test the strength of their relationship. Although they enjoy their time together, difficulties inevitably arise that require mutual understanding and compromise. One of the first challenges becomes the division of household chores. Sung-jo, used to strict routines and independence, suddenly finds that he is not always at ease with household chores such as cooking or cleaning. Ha-ni, on the other hand, is faced with the need to maintain a balance between his career and family life. This leads to some misunderstandings and tense moments when both feel that their expectations are not aligned. To overcome these difficulties, Ha-ni and Sung-jo decide to discuss their expectations and divide responsibilities more equitably. They realize that a successful relationship requires open communication and a willingness to compromise. These conversations become an important step for them to build trust and understanding. In addition to domestic issues, external circumstances begin to affect their relationship. Ha-ni receives an offer to lead an important project at work, which will require a lot of effort and time on her part. This creates additional pressure as she strives to maintain a balance between career and family life. Sung-jo, seeing Ha-nai getting overwhelmed, decides to take on more household chores so that she can focus on work. This gesture makes Ha-nai feel grateful and strengthens their bond. However, not everything is smooth sailing. At the university where Ha-ni's parents work, there are some professional disagreements that begin to affect her emotional state. Ha-nai feels torn between loyalty to her family and having to defend her own decisions. Sung-jo, noticing her tension, tries to support her by offering to listen and help her deal with the situation. This brings them even closer together, showing how much they can count on each other in times of need. In addition, a new figure appears in the couple's life: Ha-ni's work colleague, Lee Min-soo, who takes a professional interest in her. His attentiveness and support in the workplace begins to make Ha-nai slightly uncomfortable as she notices Sung-jo becoming more sensitive and jealous. Instead of reacting negatively, Ha-nai decides to discuss her feelings with Sung-jo, explaining that her affection for him remains unchanged. This frank conversation helps them further build trust and realize the importance of openness in a relationship. Sung-jo and Ha-nai's life together is slowly getting back on track, but they still face new challenges. One of these challenges is the difference in their life goals and approach to their careers. Sung-jo becomes increasingly passionate about his work, making ambitious plans for the future. His drive for success and desire to achieve lofty goals begin to occupy more and more of his time and attention. Ha-nai, for her part, finds it difficult to understand how her own dreams and aspirations can fit into their shared life. She begins to question whether she can maintain her own interests and career ambitions without sacrificing her relationship with Sung-jo. These internal conflicts lead to tension in the relationship as Ha-nai begins to feel her desires take a back seat. Sung-jo, noticing that Ha-nai is becoming more withdrawn and anxious, tries to figure out what is going on. He begins to realize that his preoccupation with work may be distancing them from each other. At one point during one of their evening conversations, Ha-ni candidly shares her feelings, saying that she misses his attention and support. This conversation becomes a real eye-opener for Sung-jo, and he begins to reevaluate his priorities. Sung-jo realizes that their relationship is as much about his personal ambitions and successes as it is about supporting and caring for Ha-ni. He decides to change his approach and begins to devote more time and attention to their life together. He learns to listen to her desires and aspirations and understand what is important to her. Although Ha-nai and Sung-jo have been able to overcome many challenges, their relationship continues to be tested. Sung-jo is faced with a serious choice that could affect their future. He is offered a job overseas that will be a significant step in his career. This offer puts Sung-jo in a dilemma: accept it and leave Ha-nai temporarily, or refuse in order to keep their relationship intact. Ha-ni, upon learning of the proposal, has mixed feelings. On the one hand, she realizes how important Sung-jo's career is to him and doesn't want to be an obstacle in his way. On the other hand, the thought of them being separated indefinitely makes her fearful and insecure. She worries whether their love can withstand such a test of distance and time. Sung-jo, seeing how worried Han-ai is, tries to reassure her. He says that this is not an easy decision for him and that he understands her anxiety. They discuss the possible consequences of his departure together, and Han-ai tries to support him despite her own fears. She convinces herself that if their love is real, it will withstand any obstacles. Nevertheless, the thought of separation keeps Han-ai and Sung-jo on their toes. They realize that their relationship has reached a new level, and now they have to decide how they will build their future. Both realize that there are difficult choices to be made that could determine their future destiny. Han-ai decides that she won't interfere with Sung-jo's career, and tells him that she'll support him in whatever decision he makes. Her sincerity and willingness to make sacrifices for his happiness impress Sung-jo. He sees how much Han-ai has changed and matured, and it strengthens his confidence that their relationship will stand up to any challenge. In the end, Sung-jo decides to turn down a job offer overseas. He realizes that he's not willing to risk his relationship with Han-ai, which has become more important to him than anything else, for the sake of his career ambitions. This decision becomes a turning point in their relationship. Han-ai is relieved and happy to learn of his decision, realizing that their love can truly overcome any obstacle. After overcoming the dilemma of a job offer abroad, Han-ai and Sung-jo begin a new chapter in their relationship, but fate once again presents them with a serious test. Suddenly, Han-ai's father is hospitalized with a serious illness. The news startles Han-ai, and she immediately rushes to him, forgetting everything in the world. Sung-jo, seeing how this event has affected Han-ai, decides to do everything he can to support her. He starts spending more time with her father at the hospital, helping with organizing treatment and dealing with all the issues related to medical procedures. His actions show how much he cares for Han-ai and her family. For Han-ai, this becomes another confirmation that Sung-jo is not only her favorite person, but also a trustworthy partner who can be relied on in any situation. However, the emotional strain begins to build up, and at some point Han-ai can't take it. Her anxiety for her father, her fear of the future, and her constant worrying find an outlet in a serious quarrel with Sung-jo. She accuses him of not understanding what she's going through, and of being too busy with his own affairs to truly be there for her during this difficult time. Sung-jo, though he tries to be calm, also finds himself under pressure. He feels that despite his best efforts, Han-ai continues to doubt him. The argument leaves both of them confused. Han-ai realizes that her fears and worries have caused her to be unfair to Sung-jo, who was actually trying to do his best to support her. She realizes that she's been overwhelmed by her emotions and has let her fears override her common sense. Sung-jo, for his part, realizes that at times like these, Han-ai needs even more care and support than usual. He decides that he won't let these difficulties ruin their relationship. Instead of distancing himself, he finds the strength to forgive her emotional outburst and takes a step toward her. After all the trials Han-ai and Sung-jo have overcome together, their relationship reaches a new, more mature stage. They now fully realize what it means to be a couple, and realize that their love is not just about romance but also about working together, being patient, and supporting each other through difficult times. When Han-ai's father recovers, life begins to return to normal. However, Han-ai and Sung-jo face a new question: what will their future together be like? They begin to discuss their plans for the future, including the possibility of starting a family and further developing their careers. Sung-jo suggests that Han-ai take a break from her studies for a while and travel together so they can spend time together and take a break from all the trials they've been through. This proposal comes as a surprise to Han-ai, but she agrees, realizing that they really need time to just be together without the distractions of everyday life. During their journey, Han-ai and Sung-jo experience many romantic and memorable moments that bring them even closer together. They visit places they've dreamed of and enjoy every minute they spend together. These days become a time for them to enjoy the simple pleasures of life without thinking about the hardships they have overcome. After returning from their journey, they begin to seriously consider starting a family. Han-ai feels ready for a new chapter in their lives, and Sung-jo shares her feelings. They decide to start planning their future with confidence and optimism, realizing that their love has withstood all the challenges. The final scene shows moments from their future lives. Sung-jo and Han-ai are together, living happily while expecting their first child. Their lives are full of joy and love, and they look to the future with confidence, knowing that together they can overcome any challenges. Han-ai and Sung-jo finally realize that their relationship is not just the result of a long journey, but the foundation of their life together. The finale leaves a sense of completion and harmony, showing that true love can overcome all obstacles and difficulties if people are willing to work at it and support each other.